Before we get started, we're going to do very brief introductions. I'm asking everybody to just say their name and where they're, the place they work with, or the place they work at, or what they've created. And then we'll get going with the questions. Vojislav, you want to start?
Okay, again, hello everybody, I'm Vojislav. I'm coming from Serbia, from youth organization called the Center V8. We are working on the engaging boys and men through the Young Men Initiative program, which is the regional program and cover a few countries in the Balkans. And also I'm theater director, and I'm working in the theater with the male actors and the boys and men.
Thank you, Vojislav. Go ahead, Jimmy.
My name is Jimmy Briggs, and I'm the founder of Man Up Campaign and a former journalist.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Asif Khan. I was with the United Nations Foundation for 3 years till last month, and I work for a female-owned tech company based out of Silicon Valley called Wonderloop.
Good morning. My name is Chris Howard. I'm the president of Hampton-Sydney College. It's the oldest men's college in America. It was founded November 10th, 1775. Top that.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Edel, and I'm the executive director of Spark Movement, which is a girls' activist organization.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Mehar Gujral, and I'm a blogger and activist with the Spark Movement, and also a first year at university.
Hello, my name is Gerardo Porteni Bacal. I am the founder of a very creatively named organization called Young Men for Gender Equality. Very self-explanatory. And I also had the privilege of being the youngest consultant of the United Nations at 19 years old last year, developing the He for She campaign.
Great. Wonderful. So you can see we have an incredible crew with us today, with all coming from all different perspectives, which is so nice to have together. So the first question I want to start, and I'm Niobe Way, I was already introduced, so I'm not going to introduce myself again. I wanted to start off with a question about what people see as the primary problem, and as well as what are the roots of the problem. And the reason I'm going to start off with that is what in my own work, I've been working with youth and interviewing teenagers since the late 80s, a long time. And one of the obvious things in speaking and working with youth is that they don't all see the problem in a similar way. So the issue of gender equality, for example, for some youth, they see it more as an issue of changing norms of masculinity as the primary goal, wanting to be perceived in a more humane way, boys in particular, girls as well. And they see it as a whole sort of range of issues, with gender equality being perhaps one of them, but not the primary one for them. So for some youth, of course, and some youth do see it. So I thought we would start off with a discussion among the panelists about how they see the nature of the problem, and then why do you think we have that problem as it relates to gender, obviously. And we're going to start off with Mehar. So Mehar, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, coming from a college perspective, I've noticed this throughout my school career, that the main problem is like a leadership gap that I've noticed that's the main lens that I've seen gender inequality through. Every student council president that I've seen, that I've grown up with, has been male. And I've always noticed that it's like, why, and it's not that there aren't girls in other leadership positions, it's that boys just feel more comfortable running for positions and feeling more comfortable with the spotlight. And I, as like a leader trying to come to terms with my own like leadership or trying to start something as an activist, I've noticed that like whenever I bring up an idea, it's not necessarily as taken up as a boy. And just thinking, like, why does that start? Like, where are those, it's like those preconceived stereotypes that prevent even girls from seeing other girls as leaders. And I think that's like the main way that I've just felt like that community kind of stifled me in trying to grow as a leader.
So this is very early, right? And as you know, I'm a very fit person, and I wasn't able to get my exercise in today. So to answer your question, I would like to do a little exercise, and I'll ask everyone to stand up with me, please. Look at the energy of this room. Do you notice this is something historical? Men and women standing together with the same goal, achieving gender equality. It is fantastic, and together we can achieve anything that we put on our plate. So please give each other a round of applause. Now, with all due respect, I'm going to need to ask the women to sit down and the men to keep on standing. Unfortunately, as we all know, we are living in a society that kind of looks like this, outside of this room, with men standing up and not allowing or not inviting women to stand up with them. And this is very unfortunate because I just felt how the entire energy of the room went down. And this doesn't seem like a group that could solve even as many problems as we had before. I think that I also need to take this moment to acknowledge all of you good, brave men that have gone way before me with this cause of masculinity. I remember when I had my eureka moment and I said, yes, we need to engage men to achieve gender equality. And then I realized that 30 years ago you were already doing this, so congratulations and thank you. And finally, for the last part of the exercise, I will ask only those who are less than 25-year-olds to stay standing, men that are less than 25-year-old. Everyone else can sit down. So I believe this is a great part of the problem. I really appreciate Michael's effort to make youth a part of the solution on gender equality. We are truly a lever of change. We have the biggest youth bulge in the history of the world. More than or around 1 billion young men in the world that should have a voice in this issue, that cannot necessarily identify with the concept of being a man or being a boy. I believe that I'm a young man. I'm 20 years old, and I need content that is directed to me to be able to relate with gender equality. And my goal is that next year we have engaging men, young men, and boys for gender equality in the tagline. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a great activity. I think when we're talking about the roots of gender inequality, we also need to talk about what we mean, what kinds of stories we're telling about gender. And so when we're talking about qualities of girls, qualities of boys, qualities of men, qualities of women, I'm not going to do a whole history of patriarchy right now, but that somehow along the way, qualities that have been more stereotypically connected to the woman and the female have become less than the qualities that are more stereotypically connected to men. So qualities like being emotional and vulnerable and sensitive is seen as less than and unimportant and even powerless and dangerous. And qualities of aggression and independence and ambition and aggression get connected to men and have more power. And so I think what we need to do is recognize the spectrum of humanity and that we, men, women, all genders, have all of these qualities that make us human, and that separation and that privileging one over the other is what's causing all of these ruptures.
And Dana, can I just throw in? So how is it? Can you tell us how you think that's related to equality per se, or is it not related to equality?
It's absolutely related to equality, because if we're privileging one over the other, we will never have equality. It's inherently an unequal balance. It's not balanced at all. And if equality can only come when we recognize the full spectrum of human qualities in all people.
You know, it's interesting that coming from a school that's all men, about 1,100 men, about an hour south of Richmond, Virginia, all of our student government presidents happen to be men, but that's just by design there. But, you know, I've been there for about 6 years. I've been involved in school for about 7 years. It's a very southern place. And so if you read your Faulkner, you know, if you deal in the South, race is always there with you in some ways. And so I happen to be an African American leading a fine school that's predominantly white. In 1992, the school was 3% non-white male, and now it's about 20%. As I said before, we started a couple hundred years ago. We had, the president at the time had a tagline or a motto that was, we want to form an institution of learning to form good men and good citizens. And that sounds pretty cool. It's stayed with us for over 2 centuries. What the heck does that mean in 2015? Now, because our school was was perceived as being sort of a finishing school for white males in Southern Virginia, and vestiges of that are kind of still there. When I came there, the conversation about you can be a good man and not be white, not be straight, not come from the South or what have you. I mean, they still use the term Yankee, and they're not talking about the baseball team, right? And so it's been interesting, and I credit some of my colleagues here that are faculty members at Hampton-Sydney College, and also the community that's been willing to go into and thinking, what does it mean to be a good man, and how we can break that apart and it not be so sort of stereotypical. We've done that pretty well, and when it comes to gender equality, which is what this panel is about, we've had a notion about being gentlemen. I think more about a gentleman, a person who tries not to do harm to others, as opposed to the old sort of Southern code. But we've started with the race and sexual orientation amongst men and dealing with hypermasculinity, and now folks are thinking, well, how can I be a good man and be abusive toward women? How can I treat them as not anything less than my equal? So it's a journey. And in the South, it takes a little bit longer. That's okay. But so that's kind of our lens, and I'm very pleased with the sort of the progress. And the thing about it, it's very organic. The last comment I would make is that if you come into a community like where I am now, and you just sort of come in and say, this is what we need to be, and so forth and so on, guys are going to kind of, well, whatever. Exactly. They're going to kind of, I think they're going to kind of recalce, they're going to kind of get into that posture. So the work is not done yet. But that's the way we're coming into it. It makes sense for our community, and as Michael Kimmel would say, we're trying to be a liberal arts college about men, and in a way that's very positive and progressive and modern, that understands women as equal partners.
Yeah. So I just want to underscore in listening, and we're going to keep this conversational style, but that each person really just said a very different point, but they're all obviously connected. So, in terms of engaging youth, the importance of leadership and women in leadership, Dana's talking about actually making our qualities equal, not just our actual literally people, but the qualities we value, and then bringing race and sexuality into the conversation. So you begin to see the importance of talking about what we see as the primary challenge, important part of the conversation. So what else? What else do people want to add?
Sure. I think socialization. I think one of the things I like to look at my personal example as well and see why I'm sitting here and not, sort of doing something else on the contrary. So I think the family is obviously the first part, and I had the privilege of babysitting a friend's twins a few weeks ago down in Virginia, and she has a little boy and a little girl, and they're playing in the sandbox, and they're 2 years old. And if you look at two little kids, there's nothing really different between them unless anatomically or the hair length, which also we do ourselves. So I just think that either one could be president or a gynecologist or an artist or a soldier or what have you. Like we do that. Like we tell the little girl, you can do this and you can't do that. And we tell the little boy, you can do this, you can't do that. So I just think it's really interesting to kind of see how people grow up and what society is doing to someone. Because I think at the end of the day, there isn't really that much different between races and sexes and genders. I mean, obviously there are differences, but I like to look at the other side. At the end of the day, we're still all human beings. So I like to kind of go back there and say, like, just look at two little kids in a sandbox and then look at them 10 years later, 15 years later, 20, 40 years later, and what have we as a society done to them as individuals and made them into man, woman, boy, girl, gay, lesbian, black, white, et cetera, et cetera. So I think socialization is key.
Can I just follow up with another question?
Yeah.
So what do you see as the root of sort of why we're socializing, right, kids in this particular way? I mean, what do you see as the root of that? Why are we doing this?
Sure. Well, I think it's an inherent culture of patriarchy, right? And it's done by men and women. I think it's really key to look at the role of women, because it's very easy to say patriarchy benefits men, which is why they're going to continue doing it. Yes, it's a problem. But I think it's also important to see that still in the majority of the world, East and West alike, women are still raising kids more often than men, and it's changing and it should change. So I just think that there's an inherent sort of structure and system that benefits one group over the other, but there's ways to sort of break that. In my own experience, I grew up in northern Pakistan, which isn't really the first country that comes to mind when it comes to gender equality, but being the son of a female cardiac surgeon and growing up in a country which had a female head of state, which is why my parents decided to move back there in the 80s, really changed myself as a boy, and which is why I'm sort of sitting here. So I just think that the other problem with that is that we always see that the problem's outside. You always think that socialization is happening in African American communities in the South or the Muslim countries in the East. But I think it's really important to see how patriarchy is affected in your own society and then go
on to the next question shortly, but I want to hear the other. Go ahead.
Excuse me. I think, well, first, I want to gently disagree with Gerardo because, I was looking at the makeup of the room when we did the exercise, which was a great exercise to do in the morning. And, I think 3, 5, maybe even last year, you would not have had a room with this ratio of men and women talking about this issue. I mean, it's not 50-50 in the room, but at a conference on masculinity to have this many women in the room is very unusual. Whereas at a women's conference, a quote-unquote women's conference, it might be a few men, but they'd be lauded for being there. So I just want to laud women for being here in this space because, I sincerely thank you for being here. Because I think too often, as men, male leaders, male feminists, we're too often self-congratulatory for coming together talking about issues we should have been talking about when we were younger. That's the first thing. But also, one of the issues of the problem, to kind of piggyback on what Chris said, I went to a single-gender school, Morehouse College, one of the few remaining HBCUs in the country. And at Morehouse, our motto was, what we were taught was, each one teach one. And I think one of the first issues is a lack of, strategic mentorship or modeling. Whereas, in communities, particularly African-American communities of color, economically challenged communities, really identifying and honoring those men, young men, boys who they might not identify themselves as feminist or gender equality activists or propagators, but they're just embracing it naturally. Throughout their lives, they just recognize inherently the necessity of, allowing women to exert their inherent power and inherent potential for achievement. And I think they have to be embraced and affirmed. I work a lot through Man Up and individually, here in the States especially, in communities of color that are often racked by violence, gang violence, gun violence. I was telling someone recently, it's very difficult as a young man, adolescent, to transform and be affirmed in your community because as much as we talk about manhood and masculinity and the importance of equality in schools and workshops, those same young men have to go back to their neighborhoods, back to the corner, and try to live with being a feminist in a community or society that doesn't embrace that says if you do act this way, if you do stand up for a woman as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, you're a punk, you're soft, something's wrong with you, maybe you're gay, they question your sexuality. So I think those young men and boys and those of us who are older in the work have to mentor them, have to embrace them, have to encourage their communities to affirm this transformation and this different modeling. I think another cause of the problem, and I have to give credit to Brene Brown for research on this, is shame. I think a lot of men and boys, feel a certain amount of shame and consequential trauma because when they try to, I guess, personally or externally react against systems which, keep them conformed towards living certain constructs of identity, masculinity, femininity, they're rejected. They're shamed for that. They're shamed for doing that, and that results in trauma. And often that trauma goes undealt with, or if there's trauma from their environment, the trauma is not allowed to be expressed in a healthy way. So, I think as activists, male and female, on this issue, we just have to recognize the importance of talking about trauma and having trauma-informed responses in this work.
We are on a panel talking about engaging youth. I was just thinking about how this manifests in young people in particular and what we need to do from the roots going up. That we are, as we saw in the activity, most of us are not, we're pretty fully formed at this point. But the importance of communicating all of these ideas to young people as they're growing up, to parents as they're raising children.
Yes, I want to answer the question, and I'm happy that we already mentioned the social norms, the pressure of the society, and expecting of the young men what they need to be. That's our philosophy and how we are working. I have a laptop with some notes here, just to know. So I never met any young boy who tell me that he. During the growing up, dreaming to be a man and be an aggressive man and be fighting with a woman and fighting against LGBT people or something. They are dreaming to drive a plane. They're dreaming to be a football player or something like this.
So you talked about your mother, and she happens to be a cardiologist. Okay. And so I'm always curious about the role models. We're talking about strategic leadership and the role of leaders, but the role of role models. You had one in your house. I went to the United States Air Force Academy, and I just so happened to have a woman 2 years ahead of me that became the first woman to be a fighter pilot. My academic advisor is now the first woman to run the United States Air Force Academy. And one of my other professors was the first woman to command a space shuttle mission in space, a NASA mission. Surely not every woman has to do all that for us to see them as equals. Hopefully not. But I was very fortunate. So talk to me a little bit about the power of having that sort of role model. Does it have to be a professional woman? Does it have to be someone who chose that? What about a woman who chose to not do that? Could she be just as much a role model in having the minds of men and boys that they are equal, even if they take that different decision? I'm just curious.
No, I definitely agree with that. So I don't, all the women, I'm just thinking back, both my grandmothers, one of my grandmothers was one of the first women to come to the UN as an ambassador for a country, and they asked her for a coffee the first time she walked in a meeting in the 50s. So I luckily, fortunately, for whatever reason, came from a background of professional women, but I completely understand your point and agree with that, because it's also a woman who's a housewife who takes care of her children, who takes care of her family, who takes care of her husband, and takes care of the house. A strong woman at the house can be any woman who stands up to something, right? Who stands up to justice, who stands up to her husband, who stands up to patriarchy. So I just think that woman can come in any form. But I think when you're young and you see a woman getting up every day and sort of going outside and working and doing a very masculine thing, what they tell you at school, so I think that gives you a different impression. But on the contrary, I think any woman can technically, if she stands up for herself, be that role model.
Okay, so, Dana,
I just wanted to add the importance of men as role models also for young men, that it's not just seeing strong women, but it's children, boys and girls, seeing vulnerable and sensitive and loving and nurturing and caring men as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dana. Okay, so we're going to move on to, people are starting to address the second question, so it's a natural transition anyway. So, and the next question is just sort of thinking about the way you see the challenges and then what are the goals. And what I'd like all of you to address is not only the sort of professional goals that we probably can second guess it as we listen to you talk anyway, but also the personal goals you have in the work, to think about what are the goals that we're actually trying to achieve in our work. The next question is going to be about strategies, which is obviously getting down to the meat and potatoes of it.
We have a lot of ambitious goals. I believe that 15 years ago with the Millennium Development Goals, they couldn't fit in that well. But we're in a point in which we don't only need to advance and promote gender equality, but effectively eradicate inequality in the world. And I think that if we work together, women and men, with the youth as well, we can achieve it by 2030. And that's the goal. And for me, it was a very natural goal to see and to understand that, I shouldn't use the word understand because I don't understand it, that 1 billion women and girls suffer from gender-based violence in their lives. And when I thought of that, I said to myself, at least 1 billion men should stand up and support gender equality. And everyone thought that I was a bit crazy, and they were completely right. But then I came up with a more modest goal, which was getting 100,000 men to sign up from all around the world to support gender equality. And the incredible thing is that we achieved both of those goals. The first one, if you go to heforshe.org, the campaign that we developed in UN Women, you can see that after 3 days of the Emma Watson speech in the United Nations, we got over 100,000 pledges, commitments of men. But the numbers aren't only the impressive part. The impressive part is that we had it divided in a geolocated map, so we knew where the men were signing up from. In every single member state in the world, 195 countries, a man have heard of this small event in Manhattan, went to his computer or his smartphone, and signed up to support the campaign, which means this is a global movement. And finally, the billion question. How are we going to get 1 billion persons around this movement? Social media, right? I remember 10 days after this campaign, we received a phone call in the office. This is probably confidential, but I'm Mexican, so it's fine. We know how to gossip well. We received a phone call in the office of Di Costolo, the CEO of Twitter. And he told me, Gerardo, please take a look at my Twitter feed, right? So I saw a big black wall with the hashtag he for she. And I thought, this is super cool. Did you saw it in a subway in New York or somewhere around the city? He was, no, this is my office now. I painted it in commemoration that the He for She was the first campaign in the world to reach 1 billion Twitter users in a matter of 10 days. So I think that it is a fact of making this the culture of gender equality.
I think that in my personal, the big goal is to be, and the challenge also in the Serbia, to be the best role model to the young men who is the part of our program, our goal is during our work is it's easy when we are working with the young men. You know, we just need to make a setup that we believe to them and talk with them without the barriers, and they are great. They don't need more than this. But the big challenge in our work and the big goal is actually to change the society, who is always expecting something from the boy. You know, if you're thinking about the message that you get from society during your growing up, who learn you how to be a man? Right. If you're thinking about this, you will maybe find 10, 15 sentences that somebody told you how to be a man, because the gender is so powerful culture construct that actually you learn about this in every moment. Every second when you're, for example, when you're born, if you're born like a boy, they will bring you to the home in the blue room with the blue stoller on your blue bed, and you will growing up in the blue world and with some expecting of you to be a man.
Yeah, no, I think the larger goal of our work with Spark is trying to end the sexualization of girls in the media, and as well as picking up the he for she, trying to end the violence against women and girls. I know, just seeing it on a global basis, that's 1 billion women, but I know, even on college campuses is something that I've become involved with. One of my friends was affected by sexual violence, and that I'd never known anybody that had been affected by it before, so it made the issue personal, and realizing that it's a real problem, that it happens, and that we have to do more to fight against it, in this part of the world, and especially hearing about the global stories as well. And and also in the larger issues, I've worked on girls' education issues, and just realizing that every girl has the right to be safe, and trying to create that safe environment. And how do you make sure that both genders can work together, because it's an issue that affects boys as well. So just trying to make sure that everybody just feels that they can, it's a joint problem, that it's not one gender's problem to just women have to be leading the movement to fight the violence against women. It's only about women. I think that's a lot of times the movement becomes about that, and that's just in colleges it's just very it's difficult to spread the word. Yeah.
You said professional and personal goals, right?
Go ahead.
Okay, for the professional goals, one's very fast, and I'm not making a joke out of this, but one goal I like to see happen in the very near future is no longer having this necessity for conferences like this one.
Yeah.
I don't want to, 5 years from now, 3 years, 10 years from now, we should not have to have a conference like this. I mean, it should be a natural conversation on popular culture and educational situations. The other goal, which I like to see happen in the very near future, is, and Vasa actually hit on it, I mean, in saying that working with young men is easy. He's right, it is easy. It's low-hanging fruit. I think as a space, we have to challenge ourselves and not, keep working with adolescents and young men, or young adults, but I think we have to be honest and really kind of push the envelopes, if you will, and start working with kids. I mean, to start talking about gender, masculinity, and violence and equality at 14, 15 years old, it's important, but it's easy. I mean, I want to start talking to kids when they're in pre-K, 5, 6 years old, because from a prevention point of view, we're not necessarily preventing violence that easily in adolescence, but if we can start working with kids, and life cycle programming. Ravika Kar, who's a special advisor on Youth to the UN, and Michael DiMario from Lions Club, Lions Quest is here. And I know they and a number of other people are talking about life cycle programming. In other words, starting off in pre-K, talking about gender, talking about identity, talking about violence, talking about sexuality in a very age-appropriate way, progressively as they get older. Not waiting until they get to high school or college to have a conversation, because I was on a panel recently where they were talking about campus assault, and one of the panelists was kind of criticizing universities and colleges for their response, and I said, perhaps that's true, but you can't expect colleges to get kids at 18, 19 years old. They've been socialized to act and think a certain way, and then when they act out on campus, say, why aren't you doing anything about it? I mean, they've had 18, 19 years to be trained this way, and I think in that time period, we could, as parents, as educators, as mentors, as faith-based leaders, as health professionals, it's our obligation to have these conversations in a very holistic way. So what I want to see happen in the very near future, if not immediately, is that as a society, we have the open conversation about these issues, because we as parents, we all know, and those who aren't parents, we know kids are being exposed to gender-based violence, partner violence, sexual assault, misogynistic language, at very early ages. They're seeing it on the subways, on the streets. So by waiting until their adolescence is not hiding anything from them. They already know what the problem is, but they just don't know how to talk about it because no one is talking to them about it.
Can I just, so it seems like, so you talk about sexualization, you're talking about bringing more people to the table in terms of he for she, et cetera, and you're talking about the importance of all these different role models, and we've talked about race, sexuality, et cetera. I think there's such a tendency in the culture we live in, to also make those separate silos. So leadership is a separate issue from sexualization of girls and women, is a separate issue from race, is a separate issue from sexuality. And so that, I guess in some sense, thinking, Jimmy, and all of you, in the goals, how do we make it clear as a parent, as a mentor, et cetera, that those issues are not siloed? They're actually integrated, and the goal of leadership, women in leadership, is the same goal as anti-sexualization of girls and women. I mean, right, that the same ultimate goal is. And I think we don't tend to hear those as similar goals. We tend to hear them as completely different conferences, right? So yeah, go ahead.
May I give that a shot
Yeah.
and sort of tie these together? So I think our goal would be to create the courage, the question, and then the courage to create a sense of agency. And I think the agency cuts across a lot of the themes we're talking about here. So the question, the courage, the question, excuse me. So we're a liberal arts institution, so we're reading great works around in the humanities and the sciences, and trying to understand this conversation of civilization with all of its ups and downs and problems and this, that, and the other, and having this interpretive and inquisitive habit of mind, right? And then having the intellectual foundation, and then to have the courage and have a culture on our campus, a men's college in 2015, to be able to say, but that doesn't make sense. That's not rooted in anything logical. That doesn't, how could you treat, I think creating that is very powerful, and we're doing some things around student life to help be more of an upstander rather than a bystander. You're hearing lots of that now when it comes to like sexual assault, et cetera. But I think, and I say this in a lot of different audiences, I want young people, and I taught at a co-ed school before I was at the University of Oklahoma, and I actually just bumped into one of my students last night. That was very cool. The whole idea that you have a responsibility to make a difference. You have the agency to say that is wrong and want to do something about it. You can cut across these stereotypes and these silos, et cetera. A sense of agency from day one. Not only you have a responsibility to do something, and if we can have an environment where that's always generated, I think great things can happen. And that again, I think that kind of cuts across a lot of different cleavages out there, and puts us in a position to implement some of the strategies that we're trying to implement. We'll come back to that in a little while about the strategies.
Yeah, and also I think the intergenerational work is really key. That we as the grown-ups at the table sometimes assume that we know what's best. This is how we should be working with young people. This is how we should teach them. This is what they need to know at these different developmental moments. And that to really listen and ask young people of all ages, what are the issues in your life today? And we will find that those issues are often very intersectional and are not so simple as, because I'm a girl, I can't do this, or because I'm black, I can't do this, but that they're so interconnected. And so if we're really thinking about, in the goals question, that is one of my personal professional goals is how do we really work intergenerationally, and what's an intergenerational movement where young people and adults are working in partnership?
I think you touched a key point. I think the solution to have a common goal is have a common voice. So we need diversity, inclusivity, and intergenerational partnerships in every single one of these organizations. And I'm going to give a clear example of how I'm trying to approach it in Young Men for Gender Equality. I founded this with an adult, with Ravi Karkara from, you mentioned him, Jimmy Briggs, United Nations. Michael Kimmel is my senior academic advisor. Dr. Charlie Robbins is my senior masculinity advisor. My mom is the president of every single organization that I start. My secret is understanding that as youth, I am only an expert at being young. I am not an expert on masculinities or academics or anything else on that. So I get smarter or more capable or more experienced people than myself in certain areas in the table to mentor me, to guide me, to show me where to go. I think that as you effectively called out, we need a national and international conversation about this. We need to, I am part of the problem because we cannot fight discrimination with segregation. We continue to call it Young Men for Gender Equality, or UN Women, or Masculinities and Men Engagement. We're all talking about the same thing, gender equality. Let's make it one conversation, and let's include each other in the table.
Well, I want to, and Asif, I'm going to direct this at you. So I wonder whether, though, is it really that the common goal is gender equality, or is it a real goal about seeing the common humanity of people, whether they're boys, girls, black, white, et cetera? So Asif, you want to?
Sure. I completely agree with what you just said. I think, yes, gender equality, obviously, but I just think it goes two ways, right? Like, I mean, my good friend Eva is sitting here, and sometimes I say this in restaurants and bars when the check comes, and it's very trivial and small, but it just speaks to something where, like, a lot of times some of the girlfriends won't even look at the check, and they look at the guys. I'm like, I'm not dating you, or like, even if I was, like, we should be splitting this. So I just think there's little things that sometimes boys get upset. They're like, well, if we're equal, then why am I paying the check? And then why am I opening doors? And why so I mean, I know it's like little trivial things, but I think it speaks to a bigger picture where if we're telling girls, you can be a CEO, you can be an astronaut, you can be president of the United States, you should also be telling boys, you can stay at home and look after the kids and do charity work and other typical, whatever you want to call it, stereotypical jobs that usually women occupy. So I just think it needs to go both ways because we're creating these very strong girls and women, and that's amazing for the whole world. But then you also need partners for these women because it needs to go both ways. So I think the gender equality piece is really important, but I think it needs to kind of be a more circular process. And I'd love it to be just equality in general, and gender not even play a role, because a lot of people don't cater and subscribe to gender or don't have to, but we kind of put them in these categories. So definitely agree with your point.
Yeah, Jimmy.
First of all, I appreciate you mentioning the idea of common humanity, which we talk about at Patch, Project for the Advancement for Common Humanity. And I think, if I can just extend it, if you don't mind, I think that our not seeing a common humanity even extends to our allies, the allies we seek out, kind of along the lines of what Gerardo was saying earlier, and Asif just now, because I think most of us here obviously are in the space somehow formally as academics, activists, educators such as Chris, artists such as Dana. And I think, one of the things in terms of that common humanity, we often, as our allies, don't, I'm saying it again, so excuse me, but that low-hanging fruit. I think one of the things we have to do is, as a journalist, I often saw well-intentioned organizations and people take a very culturally insensitive approach to the work, and also it was a very top-down approach. In other words, not really incorporating the wishes or vision for the people they were serving. Like, more survivors need to be in these conversations, survivors of violence, whether they're women, whether they're members of the LGBT community, but also in terms of allies. I think we have to kind of go outside the obvious choices of the UN system or the university system, By that, a few weeks ago, I was at West Point, and I mentioned this one recently, like, the Army doesn't want to change. Women are suffering. Soldiers, we can't talk to them. I'm like, you're totally wrong, because I tell you, at West Point, 2 days I was there, every cadet I met said, we want to work on this issue. It's our issue too. The officers, many of whom have been to Iraq and Afghanistan, said, we didn't go overseas to fight and die, and then to come back and have our fellow officers beat their partners in their homes. Like, that's not why we were over there. And so I think, we have allies in place that we may not be considering. We're not seeing their humanity. Police officers, soldiers, teachers, doctors, nurses who are on the front lines, sanitation workers. Again, we can't always have this top-down approach where we're the experts, because the people that we say we're serving, they know as well as we do, if not better, what needs to change. And we should be working with them as allies, as partners, and not saying, this is what we think, and this is what we found, and this is what you should do. We all have to be at the conversation at the table together.
Okay, I think we're going to spend, we're now in the last, so the last question is really the meat and potatoes, which is thinking about, now we've talked about goals, we've talked about the root of the problem, we've talked about goals, we've talked about crossing silos, how do we bring together these different issues and not resegregate, and now the heart of the issue is what are the strategies that we're using. And I think, Chris, I'm going to start with you. If you can just start our conversation off, and then we'll go to Mehar.
Yeah, this is a comprehensive, complex challenge, and I told you how we started coming at this as a men's college. We launched a program a few years ago called the Good Men Plan with student life and with our faculty. We have about 6 sessions each year. It's not enough, but it can be a very important catalyst. And I'll mention one of the sessions we do. It deals with false masculinity and hypermasculinity, which is a root of many, many problems out there. In fact, I've been known in many audiences to make people say false masculinity is the devil, things like that, and we're getting that right. But we have a session, it's taken from Tony Porter's Man Box, that episode. Have you seen the TED Talk on that? It's great, but even better, we have our men's studies group led by many of the faculty members we have in the audience today, along with our student life and our res life students, so peer-to-peer as well. And they have kind of a lesson plan, and they come together, groups of about 20 students, with a faculty member or staff member and another student. They watch the TED Talk, which is very powerful. I mean, Tony really puts it out there. And there's something about a big black dude being very vulnerable, which allows for vulnerability so a conversation can really go down. So they watch the session. I sat in the back of the room this time, and then we had this really deep conversation which goes all the way through masculinity, men can't cry, and they start talking about women. And the woman who led the session that I was in, again, these are 18-year-old boys, and the woman who led the session starts talking about, well, how do you explain the man box or the man code, the guy code, to your sister, to your mother? And the wheels start turning. They start talking about, and one of our professors out here, Professor Hardy, mentioned that in her session, the young men start talking about, well, sometimes I see women, we got to have a conquest. We got to meet a young lady, take her to our room, get her to stay with us. I don't like that answer, but I like the fact they're talking about it. So the strategy that young men can be in a very, very vulnerable space with men intergenerationally, their peers, and also intergenerationally, having a very open conversation about things that are happening that they don't really like or think are right, and they're confused about it. I think good things are going to happen. It's not the solution, but you can imagine 20 years ago when guys are together they're not going to say, and I kind of feel bad about that, or they're not going to even confess it to a professor in the room. So we've got a dialogue, and I think that open, honest, vulnerable dialogue will get us to a place of gender equity, and that's kind of what we're doing now. That's one of our strategies.
Okay, great. Mehar, you want to take that next? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I love this that we were talking about agency before, and I think in terms of boys being involved in gender equality, I think the He for She movement has been great in terms of engaging them. I have so many friends who are interested, especially like my university has the International Relations Students Association, and we send a delegation to the Commission on the Status of Women every year, and this year it's 7 boys, 7 girls. So we've been having these conversations for the past couple of weeks, like really being able to talk about it, because a lot of times the conversation about gender equality through the organizations that I've been involved in has been very we're a group of girls trying to solve it. And so this time it was interesting to talk, it was like a different experience for me that we were actually having this with both the genders. And they were very excited about, like, I think, like, especially having Emma Watson as like the global advocate for the Harry Potter generation is like amazing. We love her, and her having her like say these things, I think really means a lot to boys especially as well. Like, I think it's like really inspired a lot of people as well as girls to call themselves feminists. I think that agency is now there, like a lot, especially in terms of college students, and they've signed up on the website. But they just like now I think it's about like having the agency is there at like the first step, but then also having the forum to like being able to like talk about these issues, finding the conversation. Like I attend McGill University in Montreal, and that's like a 20,000 student campus, and just like you have to, if you want to have that conversation, you have to search for it, right? Try to find those forums. So I think just trying to bring the people, like it just actually creating those spaces where people can talk about it rather than it just being like a social media thing, because social media is a great first step, but it's also like translating it to real, actual places, spaces where people can talk about these issues is one thing. Creating, like with Spark, we have like creating a young global feminist community online, but also like physically spaces. I think calling it something else, like speaking about the common humanity, like having a word for like these spaces that everybody can just talk about gender equality issues, I think will be the next step in terms of young people being able to comfortably express themselves about their goals.
Awesome. That's really cool. So we did a performance piece at the United Nations this past fall in celebration of the International Day of the Girl. That was a really cool project where we worked in partnership with NGOs connected to the Working Group on Girls at the UN. And we sent out a call for stories from girls from all over the world to write about what it's like to be a girl where you live. And we got responses from over 120 girls from 22 countries. And then we worked with an ensemble of teenage girls here in New York City, and we adapted all of those stories into a performance piece that was performed by teenage girls in New York City at the UN on the Day of the Girl, in a special event that included different policymakers and ambassadors from the UN that responded to the girls' stories, so that the girls' stories were at the forefront of a conversation about what are we doing about girls in the world. And so girls had a chance to speak for themselves about the issues that they're dealing with daily on the ground. Then another little pitch for another Spark project that we just launched this week that's super exciting, about creating alternative stories and role models, like Asif was talking about a little bit earlier, that we worked with Google over the last year to create a phone app that maps women's history globally. So it gives you, it's connected to Google mapping technology, and it alerts you wherever you are in the world when you approach a location where a woman contributed something significant, as a way to reinsert women's stories into global history. And we worked with our team of Spark Girls, wrote all of the bios. We have about 120 women now mapped, and we're trying to expand the project into thousands of women in 28 countries right now, but hope to increase that as well.
I think that we need to unlabel how we categorize social impact in order to give everyone an entry point and give everyone an opportunity to support. We have developed in Young Men for Gender Equality what we call the AAA theory of social impact. The first A is awareness. I think that if you want to change the world, if you want to change the country or your community, you need to start by changing yourself and understanding that gender inequality affects both men and women, and sometimes we consciously or unconsciously do behaviors or actions that are perpetuating this inequality. So we need to be aware of that to start creating a change. The second A is advocacy. As we all know, through advocacy, we could shift programming, policy, and legislation. Of course, there are so many countries in the world that still prohibit women to have an active political participation. But even here in the United States, there are some legislations or policies that not necessarily are aligned with what we believe as gender equality. And more than that, the programs. Most of the programs of gender equality are directed towards women. And I have a wonderful story of a guy called Marco in Zimbabwe that went around his village recruiting all of the other men and created a husband school where he taught all of the other men how to be better fathers, better husbands, better men. So I think that if we start creating programs like this one, programs inclusive, and we could where we could sit on the same space and discuss about this issue, that will be brilliant. And finally, the action. We all know that gender inequality is one of the, or women's issues in general, is one of the most underfunded causes in the Millennium Development Goals, going to the Sustainable Development Goals. When Secretary General started UN Women or founded UN Women, he envisioned a $1 billion budget per year. And now, in 3 years of operation, it has only recruited $250 million, so not even a quarter of what it should have. And I think that we all face these issues in our own organizations. And when the people or the global champion of women and girls is one-legged, it's very difficult for it to really create the change that we need to see. So through creative innovation, not necessarily traditional philanthropy, we could really go ahead and be funded and effectively eradicate gender inequality.
I think one of the things that, so my background is reproductive health and contraception at the UN Foundation, and I was the only guy on the team for 3 years, which was interesting to me that not only was there an absence of men in the policy piece of these two very, very important issues, and gender equality is very involved in contraception for obvious reasons. Also an absence of the people where they were targeting. Men were never involved in maternal health policy. It's like women have kids and they don't raise kids, but that's wrong. And so one of the things I tried to change in sort of my own way was to make sure that men were both targeted and also recruited in both sides of the equation. And that was very successful, and I'm proud to say that all our maternal health programs now have a male stream to all the messaging that is done to women. What I'm doing now in the tech world is working for a female-owned tech company is just exciting anyway, because she's one of the only women who has a tech company in Silicon Valley, and she actually wanted a male partnerships consultant, which is me, because when she goes into meetings, they just look, literally the investors don't look at her, but they look to see like a guy there. And this is happening in California, one of our more progressive states in a progressive country. So what we're trying to do with this app called Wonder Loop, and I'd encourage everyone to check it out, is have a video profile of people creating change in the world and doing things. I'm just so excited and invigorated by how apps and mobile technology and internet is so exciting for young people. I mean, I was in Mexico and people use Tinder there, and Tinder came out last year in the United States. So I just think there's such huge change in market there. So I really want to harness technology and have people actually talk about how they're making the world a better place. So through Wonder Loop, we're trying to do that, to have people like you and young people actually talk about the changes they're making. And you have 20 seconds, so it's super quick. But so I think those two things. And both of these have a big youth component. With Wonder Loop, I think I want 95% of our video profiles to come from youth, but also older people who work with youth. Because as someone said really correctly earlier, like, I want to ask youth, what is the problem that you see every day, and let's work with you to face it instead of us telling them what the problem is.
We have this conversation on our campus a lot, and we do this thing called the Vocational Reflection Project, and we were talking about who would lead the sessions for the young men. Should it be men and women or just men? Only because is there something about a space sometimes where men can be more vulnerable around other men? You know, sometimes you're kind of embarrassed saying things around your mom that you would say around your dad. At least in my house that happens some. And I've kind of come to the conclusion, I want to see where you are and other people on the panel, that I think that people that live adjusted lives, therefore they're not going to be violent, whatever, they have multiple sources and places and spaces to be human. You know, sometimes I like to be around African American men because our experiences are so unique. I'm putting together a group of African American men that run independent, predominantly white independent universities and colleges in America. It's a small group. There's like 4 of us.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're gonna hang and we're gonna talk about stuff and finish each other's sentences. Man, it's pretty funny. But I like that. And I also want a group with that feels like the United Nations. I mean, everybody from, you know, this group right here, I'm feeling very comfortable with this group. Dana's my new friend. Asa's my new buddy. But I think you need many of those. And last thing I say, you can't let the one group, when you're hanging out with the fellas, let it bog down and become something that's misogynistic or in some instances racist or whatever. But I'm just curious what you think, because you're coming out of a similar background as a Morehouse graduate.
Well, just quickly, I mean, you know, that is true, especially going to a school like Morehouse, where it's all male, it's all African American men, which is a unique experience in this country. But you know, I think I'll answer your question, Chris. I'll refer to something that's been developed recently, the Barbershop Initiative, which I love which is a UN initiative.
Jimmy, just repeat what you just said. I don't think it.
The Barbershop Initiative, Barbershop, which is an initiative launched in the past 6 months by he spoke Thursday night. Ambassador McDonald from Suriname. He did it at the UN, but I told him I like the concept of it because I think for men of color in particular, the barbershop was like the social hangout. It was the place where you kind of made jokes at each other, cracked on each other, but also you could talk about serious issues. And I love that concept of extending it to the nail salon, to the spa, to the pub, wherever to the basketball court, to the football field, to the locker room. Wherever people can come together of a particular background or different backgrounds and have these authentic conversations in safe spaces, comfortable spaces. They have to be facilitated and have to be encouraged because, to your point, Chris, I mean, sometimes like you, I feel comfortable talking about certain issues when it's just men of a certain background, but sometimes I want diversity to be challenged and hear different perspectives.
So we just wanted to open up the discussion. We have about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. We started very late, but we'll go for a little tiny late. With asking two questions, Asif came up with one, and Dana and I came up with another, and it's all questions that we have of the audience, which is thinking, first of all, Asif, and correct me if this is sort of the obstacles to engaging youth. What do you see as the primary obstacles? And then the second one, which we're going to start with obstacles, but the second one we're obviously interested in is what kinds of strategies do you think help to engage youth, and something possibly that you learned from listening to these folks up here. There's lots of hands going up. Okay, so why don't we start? I'm just going to start here. The light is shining in my eyes, so I can't see that well, but why don't we start with this person, and then we'll swing over this way. Go ahead. Can you stand up and try to project as much as possible?
Hi. I think one of the obstacles is that young men and women both don't think there's an issue. And I'm 50, and honestly, I didn't think there was an issue when I graduated from college a long time ago. Yeah. I think part of it is everything's cool, women can do anything they want, men can do anything they want, and there's incredibly powerful norms that affect our lives that you have to get to a certain stage in life before they become relevant. I think so that's one issue. I think one really powerful strategy is making it experiential, because some of the research, the ideology of middle school youth is everything is equal, boys and girls are equal, but you dig under the surface. Right. Or even, men coming out of business school and women, you dig under the surface about the particulars. How are you going to raise the child? Who's going to cut back at work? It all disappears. So I think it needs to be very experiential and about details and not the broad brush, because I think that's where the behaviors are really on the ground changing.
Yeah, and I just want to resonate with having worked with youth almost 30 years at this point, how much young people oftentimes don't think that there's a problem, and old people don't think there's a problem either, by the way. So that making it clear how it is a problem, and making that bring that information in. Okay, so someone else. I think there was a hand. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My name is Lydia, and we've been working with youth corners in our organization, and one of the things that I think is very critical, and one of the things I would like to put through to them, is that the communication strategies that are being put there to address the young people and their parents and teachers. And I really think that some of the communication material, the messages coming out, are not really youth-friendly and won't serve us. So I just want to say that sometimes we don't know how to develop the messages for our parents, for the parents, for the teachers, and maybe one of the things we could do is that we've been trying to do in our youth corners is trying to say, what kind of messages do the young people really want to send out there to the parents? What do they want to send out there to the teachers? So by collecting this, so I think we need to have a lovely platform where we can sit down and experiment on communication and messaging, which is going to really help us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I see one of the biggest obstacles is it's not the activists or the academics, but the general reliance on media and entertainment that engage the minds of our youth. Nobody's addressing the objectification and all the messages that go on. It's one thing to say you use digital technology and social media, but I see a big obstacle in that the influence on a day-to-day basis is huge, And I don't see people addressing how the Hollywoods and Bollywoods and all of the Latina media and everything else, they're not addressing this. So I think we really need to think about how people like in this room can really start to influence and change the messaging that goes on day after day, night after night.
Thank you for that, and obviously we're not doing a good enough job at it, but I assure you, there are so many organizations that are working tirelessly in addressing media. Spark's main mission is challenging sexualization of girls in the media. We work with the organization, the Representation Project. There's probably somebody here from there that just did a fantastic campaign raising awareness about the ways that we engage women on the red carpet at the Oscars, challenging the commercials that appear in major broadcasts like the Super Bowl. Working with the Gina Davis Institute, that's all about representations of girls and women in Hollywood. So there is a lot of work. There needs to be a lot more work, and we need all of us here to be doing that work together.
I think it was Ashif who said something about listening, right, to young people. I mean, having the conversation not necessarily start with this generation, but with listening to what young people are interested in, and so that can be very culturally specific.
Right.
I work on a project that uses film to engage not just young people, but men, women, young people in conversations about gender and to gender sensitize them. But it doesn't have to be film. It really depends, I think, a lot on what the young people you're working with are really compelled by, what moves them. And in the case of the project that I do, I guess I just wanted to not necessarily give it a plug, but talk about how we are curating films about that give positive examples of men, women, girls, boys. And one thing that we found is that there are not really enough films about girls and boys, about young people to show as role models. And we're very interested in finding more of them. So if people are aware of those films, documentary films that we're looking for about young people, I'd be really interested in hearing about them. But also wanted to say that we're creating a toolkit for using film for engagement that will be applicable to really any NGO. So in the next year or so, we should have that available, as well as a collection of films that can be used. And oh yes, and the organization that I work for is called ITVS, but the project is called Women and Girls Lead Global. So you can get in touch if you are interested in using film for development, and at some point we'll be able to hopefully meet the needs of a lot of organizations.
Hi, I have a positive comment to make, but I guess it's also a comment about the already converted. I work as a journalist and an author and a blogger, and I might be biased in terms of the young people who engage with my work. But I feel like young people today are very literate when it comes to gender issues, particularly compared to 10, 15 years ago when I was in high school or in college. I think that the struggle isn't so much an understanding of gender or sexuality or race, because these conversations are happening all over social media, and it's really not just a matter of what they're consuming, but it's a matter of the conversations that young people are leading and producing, which I think is really exciting. But I think the challenge is something that you guys have raised up on stage, which is about recognizing our common humanity. So I think there is a tendency for the young people who are engaged in these conversations to see it very much in terms of villains and heroes, whereas I would like to see the conversation turning to be something of solidarity.
So on that note, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. And could we give each other a round of applause, please? Thank you, everybody.